Welcome to On the Corner of Main Street, presented by Plaza Hotel and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Here is Plaza CEO Jonathan Jossel, Gary Vickery, and I'm your host, Lisa Melmed. Hello, Gary.
Hello. How are you guys?
Welcome back.
I've missed the podcast.
Jonathan is not with us today, so it's me and you.
I've taken on a couple little responsibilities around the property, so haven't been able to make myself totally available for the podcast. So
well, we appreciate everything you're doing.
I'm the number one listener right now. But I'm happy to be back. Our episode today is with the legendary UFC announcer, Bruce Buffer. We've talked about everything when it comes to Las Vegas, from dining, nightlife, casino, sports. You know, we just wrapped up a few weeks ago with March Madness. We're approaching the NFL draft in about a week or so. But one of the things that we haven't really discussed in depth is mixed martial arts, the UFC. And the UFC is kind of a staple here in Las Vegas. What do you know about the UFC? Lisa?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
No, I know that we used to have UFC watch parties here in the plaza that you used to run and manage. I remember moving to Vegas and hearing about Fight Night or UFC Fight Night and having absolutely no idea what anyone was talking about. But it's a huge, when you think of Vegas, you think of UFC fighting.
Yeah. Las Vegas has kind of been the staple for a lot of combat sports, whether it's boxing or UFC, for decades. Mike Tyson always fought at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Michael Buffer used to be the legendary announcer for all of those big-time events. So ever since the UFC really picked up its prominence back in the early 2000s, so 2001, 2002, that's when everything kind of exploded for the UFC. And Vegas is where all the big fights happen. That's the mecca of combat sports.
What is the purpose of UFC?
Originally, when the UFC first was formed, we'll say, it was a bunch of different disciplines that would come together in in one cage, and they would fight. So you would have a kickboxer that would go up against a Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist, and they would run tournaments, and there would all be several different types of martial arts competing to see which one was the most dominant martial arts. The first few UFCs, the main discipline that won was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That was Royce Gracie who won the first few UFC events. But since then, people have started to pick up multiple disciplines, and where the term mixed martial arts now comes from is everybody who goes into the sport learns how to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing, standard boxing, wrestling, are all the fundamentals that make up mixed martial arts and a mixed martial arts fighter.
Have you ever participated in a UFC? Or a UFC style training, fighting?
Yes. So back in high school, I was a amateur wrestler. So we're learning a whole lot about me.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah. Varsity wrestler.
Varsity?
I was pretty much the only one in my weight class, so it was pretty easy to make varsity. After school, so about 10 years after that, took up jiu-jitsu. Probably no good at it anymore, but I was at least a blue belt in jiu-jitsu.
Nice. Very cool.
So I definitely respect the sport, and Las Vegas has had its fair share of MMA gyms that are around and has kind of been the home of the UFC. From them starting in some of the smaller regional areas, like the Palms Hotel and Casino would have events. Red Rock up in Summerlin did have some events with us as well. And then they just grew from MGM Grand Garden Arena to T-Mobile, and probably one day they'll be at Allegiant. And yeah, the sport is it's just completely exploded. I think you have to look at it now as you have 5 main sports in the United States. You have hockey, basketball, football, baseball, and mixed martial arts.
Wow, I'm surprised you started with hockey.
We have the Knights here.
For sure.
Right?
Love the Knights.
Yeah.
Go Knights, go. All right, let's bring in our guest.
Today, we have a very special guest. Today, we are joined by the veteran voice of the Octagon, as well as also his own podcast, It's Time, by Bruce Buffer. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Bruce Buffer, welcome to On the Corner of Main Street.
Checks in the mail. I always love a good intro. How are you, Lisa? How are you, Gary?
Very good.
Thank you. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Gary is a huge fan of yours, and he is thrilled and excited that you're here. So tell us how you got started in announcing.
A long story made short. I have owned my own companies and businesses since I was 19 years old, and always, in various different ventures. Always done well in business, but I never found what I was truly passionate about till I was about 37. And that was roughly 7 years after meeting a man who is a legendary announcer named Michael Buffer, known for his "Let's get ready to rumble" phrase. We were long lost half brothers. And we did not meet till about the age of, I was about 29. He was around 43, give or take. It was a strange thing because it came out on TV when Tyson was getting really huge in boxing, and boxing was the water cooler conversation on a Monday, the way the UFC is today. And out comes this very debonair, James Bond looking individual saying the famous phrase, "Let's get ready to rumble." And I became a fan. But when they put his name on the screen, it said Buffer. And I owned telemarketing companies in my 20s and 30s. I never saw my name in a phone book pre-internet when we all looked at phone books. So it struck me really funny. And I searched and sent off letters and, stuff to try and find out if people knew who he was. And after people came up to me saying, "Is that your brother?" When he started getting really famous, and I just get hit by all these people. I go, "No, my brother's Brian." But my dad, later on, when we talked about it, told me that he was married during World War II, something he never told me, and that he had a child. And a divorce ensued when he came back from the war. And last time he saw the child was when he was 2.5. And it's one of those stories. And that was Michael Buffer. So they got together. My dad contacted him, and turned out that it was his son. And 4 years later, I gave up everything I was working on, 2 companies. I was doing fantastic, beach house, living the life of 2.5 men like Charlie Sheen, minus the alcoholism. And basically sold my companies and quit with the money and the bank, and took over his management, and just told him, I said, "I want to make you richer and more famous than you ever dreamed, and hopefully myself in the process." And then I started managing him in the boxing announcing industry. And with that being said, I wanted to announce, but we agreed that, it would not be good for me. It's a confliction of interest, and there was no money in announcing. He's the only one that was making any money. And I said, fine, something will come along. And when the UFC came along in 93, when it had its first show, I've been a martial arts since I was 12. I have 3 black belts. I fought a lot, and it was my world. But I got him to do the first 3 UFC events, that 6, 7, and 8, 6, 7, and Ultimate back then, UFC 6, 7, and Ultimate, basically in 1996. And then I had to pull him because we had a big contract with WCW Wrestling. They weren't particularly happy he was doing UFC, and he couldn't have continued at the rate the UFC was growing. So I convinced the owners to hire me, which was something that took me 1.5 years to do. They let me announce the prelims in Puerto Rico one time. Then they gave me one full show. Then they hired somebody else. And finally they asked me to co-star on the TV show Friends. And I co-starred as myself on the show. And on the lunch break on the first day of rehearsal, I met with the owner and I said, "Look, I feel like a girl waiting to be asked to the prom, and I'm not getting asked. This is the last time I'm going to ask you, but I need to be the announcer. I will help you build this sport. I have the media contacts even more than you have to publicize it because people are scared of it. And I'll help you build this brand, but I need to grow as the announcer." And it was the best poker hand I ever played. And that was back in 1996.
Are you technically the longest tenured UFC, maybe not employee, but employee for the UFC?
Yes. Well, how about longest tenured independent contractor?
There you go. Yeah. So you originally started with UFC 6, if I'm not mistaken, as a manager, as a corner guy?
Yes. And UFC 6, I think it was February 16th, 1996 in Beaumont, Puerto Rico. I got contacted by a fighter named Scott the Pitbull Ferrazzo, a big monster of a man. And he was like the Tank Abbott style fighter they loved to have back then. And I sent the tape to the owner of the UFC, and they accepted him. And I got to fly down as his manager. And it was great. And I convinced them at the party the night before that I had a tuxedo in my bag to let me announce the prelims. And that's how I got that.
Wow. And you always dress very sharp. It sort of elevates the sport, and I think it inspires other people to dress up a little nicer as well.
If I have that effect, it's great. I mean, by day, I'm an old-time surfer, Lululemon bathing suit by day and tuxedo
really?
by night. But I've been called a fashionista or fashion icon, rather, or whatever, by the UK Sun. And the New York Times, and I get a giggle out of it, but I do have incredible suits. They're one of a kind. And I want to thank my exclusive tailors, which are My King and Bay out of Toronto, Canada.
Do you reuse the suits, or is every suit unique to each UFC event that you announce?
I would need a house if that was the case.
Right.
Can we see your closet?
I do have a big walk-in closet, and I do have probably 60 to 80, jackets, tuxedos, but I will wear them, and then they'll go to the back of the line, work their way up, and you'll see me maybe wear it, a second time in a year or 2 years. So I try to space them out.
So how did you trademark "It's Time"? And how did you have any other sayings before that?
No, the only trademark I dealt with before that was "Let's Get Ready to Rumble," which is Michael Buffer's own trademark. And as his manager, I've been working on that. So I was never trademark driven. I didn't even develop "It's Time" until probably about, I'd say 7-8 years into my announcing. And when I did, I didn't trademark it at first. Most announcers think you have to have a trademark. A phrase. I was never phrase driven. To me, it's not what I say, it's how I say it is the big thing for me. And I'm much more, I would say I'm probably more passionate when I perform or when I announce than most announcers, with all respect to other announcers and all the fine jobs they do, but they concentrate on their voice and they're standing there, in one spot. I have to move. I've got to let it all fly. Like I said, I used to bang. I know what it's like to fight, and I want to introduce the fighters the way I would want to be introduced. I never rehearse. I just get in there and do it, whether I jump, I turn, or whatever I decide to do when I'm doing it, or get in the fighters' faces if they're egging me on. I never instigate a fist bump. They instigate that with me, which is an honor. But when It's Time took off, and I went to a show. We did the first show back in Brazil in 2003. We went back to Brazil. And when I did It's Time, the entire audience in the stadium, about 20,000 Portuguese speaking people, said "It's time" with me. Right. And when I got out of the octagon, I thought, oh my God, what was that? Right. Immediately went through the trademark process and got a trademark.
Was that one of your favorite arenas?
Yes. But Brazilians, as well as Canadians, as well as recently last weekend with the UK, they're rabid fans. Not that they aren't here in the United States, but 20,000 Portuguese sound like 100,000 people, as they do in the UK. And I can't even walk down the streets. They're jumping out of cars, wanting to take pictures of me and stuff like that, because we're as popular as soccer down there. And the same thing happens when I go to certain places. It's hard for me to walk around, which I'm honored by. It's all great. It's kind of like being Elvis Presley for the weekend.
That's awesome. Do you have any specific arenas that you enjoy just based off of the acoustics of the arena and not just the, just the fans?
Yeah, sure. No, the T-Mobile in Vegas is great. The O2 in Montreal, the O2 in London, they're fantastic. They really are. Some, I can hear myself better, so I can modulate better in some of the arenas. But every city, every arena has its own flavor, and I just respect and appreciate it wherever I'm at. Make the best of it. We've had arenas in Brazil where they're literally kicking out the homeless before we go in. So, and it's pretty crappy in its own way, but it all makes up for it when the show begins and everybody's going crazy.
How are some of your experiences? I know you've done a lot of pregame warm-ups for the Las Vegas Raiders. How's doing some of those announcements? I know you did the first game on Monday Night Football. I think a few games that me and Lisa went to, you were, your trademark "It's Time" at the beginning of the, you're getting everybody pumped up for 70,000.
It's amazing. You walk out on the dais where they have me do that at Allegiant Stadium, and you're high up, and there's, I forget how many people in the arena, 70, 80,000, and I'm on the Videotrons all around. It's an amazing experience. It really is. They say I make the hair stand up on their arms. I make the hair stand up on my own arms. Really? That way I know I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll get a UFC at Allegiant Stadium soon?
I can't answer that. I'm not the powers that be. It would have to be one heck of a show to fill that arena.
Right.
I know there was talk about being at Texas Stadium down in Dallas and doing it there. I'm sure putting together the right show, it would get packed. We've rarely, if ever, maybe once or twice been outside. It's always been inside. So it'd be an incredible experience, but I'm not the one to ask that. That's a call to Dana White.
So Las Vegas is really the true home to UFC. What makes Fight Night so special and important?
Vegas is, as Madison Square Garden's a mecca for fighting, but Vegas is a mecca for fighting, all the years of boxing, all the development of the UFC there. Recently with COVID, of course, we've been restricted to the Apex with maybe an audience of 50 to 100 people or nobody. And I still give it my all. But there's always that grand excitement of being in Vegas, the whole thing, the aura of Las Vegas, the shows, the this, the that. And you can't beat a Vegas atmosphere. When it's packed, it's unreal. Like the T-Mobile show we had there last month, it was just amazing. So it's just, it's Vegas. Vegas is the town for the greatest shows on earth. And I would like to say that the UFC is one of the greatest shows on earth. The announcing is a work in progress, but I'm getting better at it, I think.
I heard Tom Brady called you the greatest announcer of all time. So I think you've earned
that was quite a thing for him to say. I called him the GOAT, and then he just started laughing. He goes, "What do you mean?" And then he told me that, and it's like, wow, Tom, thank you. Coming from you, that's amazing. There's certain comments, whether it's the great Tom Brady or whether it's a 12-year-old young boy or girl coming up to me, they both have the same level of excitement for me. If I can have effect on a young child, growing and as well as an effect on the greatest quarterback that ever lived, it's both equal to me. I'm very humble about the whole thing. I go out, I do my job, and every night I walk out in the octagon. To me, that's the time I have to prove that I deserve this job. I have to prove it to the fans, prove it to Dana White and the powers that be that, I work for, and prove it to the press and prove it to my mom. And so I'm very happy, And when I get out, I just got out of this great show in London Saturday. I'm going to Columbus, Ohio this Saturday. And
wow.
It's time to prove again that I deserve this job. I treat it like the first night, every night. That's what keeps my passion rolling. And when my passion starts to wane and I can't perform the way I want to perform, then it's time for me to retire.
Where are you located?
I'm in Los Angeles. I live near the beach.
So when you come to Vegas, do you stay overnight or do you fly back?
I usually, for a Vegas trip, I'll fly in on a Friday night and I'll leave early Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Where do you usually stay?
It depends. Lately, MGM, Mandalay Bay, the Wynn.
Do you ever come downtown?
Rarely.
We got to get you over
no
to the
offense.
plaza.
No offense, rarely, because I get there on a Friday night. I've got to pre-prep and do everything. Then I got to get right to the show, full day on Saturday. And afterwards, I like to hit Piero's for dinner or depending on where I'm staying. And it's all good.
We had Freddie from Piero's on our podcast as well previously.
Oh, yeah. Character.
What does that day before the fight look like for you? How do you prepare for? Do you do vocal warm-ups?
Nope.
Or anything?
Nope. I don't rehearse.
Wow.
I don't rehearse. I mean, of course I take care of my voice. I don't want to do anything to damage my voice, but at the same time, I want to walk out in the arena, feel the energy off the crowd, and that drives me. That's what drives me.
How was it like when, especially during the big time of COVID and, doing some of the events at the Apex, how has that changed, not being able to feed off the energy for you to be able to give that same, dynamic performance that you usually do? Well,
when you're performing, you might say it's almost a form of acting in a way. The bottom line is that I need to create, in my mind, I need to create the energy for the people watching on television that there is an audience, right? So I'm still going to give it my all. Now, obviously, when I'm surrounded by 20,000 people like I was Saturday, the energy that creates them combined with the energy I put into my announcing, it becomes even more so. But still, if nobody's there, I'm going for it. My job is to enhance that moment for the fighters coming in that octagon. I mean, they're walking out where normally they have fans going crazy over them. Now they're walking out to no fans or minimal fans. So that's kind of unfair in a way, but it is the reality of the current world in which we live. So it's up to me to enhance that moment for them and bring that energy, right? I think it would just look totally different if I just kind of like, oh, there's only 20 people here or 50 people. Let me just tone it down.
Yeah.
No, this is a show.
Are there any names that are hard to pronounce?
Yeah. And you'll probably be surprised by this. Like, give me Khabib Nurmagomedov or the longest syllabic names all day long. But if you give me a name like Frank Trigg or Mike Swick, they're single syllable names. They take a little bit more to create the excitement from.
Wow. And you add the H into it?
Yeah, that's funny. No, that's just the way I say it. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the emphasis I put on it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a writer for ESPN that did a really cool article on my brother and I, and he wrote about the H, and I didn't even think about it till he wrote it. And I said, oh yeah, I can see where that could be interpreted.
Uh-huh. Oh, interesting. I hear that a slot machine is being created for you.
It was an online slot machine, not a standalone in the casino, and they're actually out on the market now. There's one for my brother and one for me, and they're on the various gaming sites that are out there.
Do you gamble?
Yeah, I treat it in a very different way. I treat my gambling like a business. I can tell you every day I played, what I made, what I lost, tally at the end of the month and tally at the end of the year for the last 15 years. I've only had 2 losing years.
Oh, wow.
But I only,
Because you're a poker player.
Yeah, I'm
Every good poker player will keep everything there. But you
not
do
all
the same?
of them, but the smart ones do, because anybody comes up to you and says, hey, I just won 5,000. They don't tell you about the 10 times they lost 3, right? So I treat it very realistic. So I'm realistic with myself. And again, I treat it like a business. So but I have fun while I do it.
Do you have any plans for the upcoming WSOP events?
I'd love to, but with the UFC and everything, I won't be able to play the main event. I haven't been able to block out the main event for at least the last 6 years. And the last time I played, I made it to day 5, and I placed like 450th or so out of like 80,000 plus people, won about 30,000. Got knocked out the day 5 right before the first break with pocket aces on the button. And the guy slow played me. He had a pair of 8s in the hole and he flopped quad 8s. So I lost. I had the dead man's hand. If you know that Wild Bill Hickok story, aces and 8s. Went out with aces and 8s.
Wow.
So lost 532,000 chips on one hand. I was on my way. I was in the top. I was right there.
Oh, man.
And ESPN people even said I was kind of like a dark horse coming along. Well, that dark horse fell.
Do you have any advice for people getting started in their careers?
They're 2 different fields, but in announcing, it's a difficult area to get into because there's not a lot of jobs out there, but it's not possible. And if you have a dream of that, you should concentrate and work on getting reps, doing other things, whether it's on the sidelines for a high school basketball game or whatever. Get as many reps as you can to work on your voice. At the same time, with a podcast, a lot of people have podcasts today, as we know. Just go into it, be yourself. And it depends what kind of podcast you want to have. But if you're going to have a podcast that's specific, be an expert at what you're going to be specific about. If you're going to have a podcast like I do, like a lifestyles podcast, and, concentrate on just talking and your opinions and develop it. And again, the more reps you get, the more comfortable you get. Every time I do a podcast, it's a very cathartic experience. It's almost like sitting down with a psychologist, which I've never done, but I feel like I have, because at the end of the show, I rave, I get everything out, and I feel like, oh, I feel good. That was good.
Now.
Feel a little relieved.
Totally. I think we feel the same way.
I do have a question for you. Are there any plans for you to be here for the draft? Because there'd be nothing special than seeing Bruce Buffer do one of the picks for the NFL draft.
I would love to. I appeared at the Pro Bowl, and they were talking about me appearing at the Super Bowl. And I love football. So if I get approached by it, then I would definitely, my schedule permitting, love to be there. I've already been contacted by one person who's talking to him, but nothing concrete yet. We will see. But when it comes to the NFL, I love it. I mean, the Super Bowl was a bucket list for me. There was talk about me doing it, and I was honored that Dwayne The Rock went out and said, it is time. A little too many times he said it is time, but it was still really cool to see Dwayne do his thing, because The Rock is just always a showman.
Well, we have to thank you so much for your time today and for joining us on the corner of Main Street. People can stay up to date with you on Instagram at Bruce Buffer UFC or at brucebuffer.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, check me out at brucebuffer.com. We do a tremendous amount of videos for weddings, birthdays, birth of babies, special business events, on Cameo and at brucebuffer.com. And partial proceeds I send to military, animal, and children's charities.
Wow.
So we try to pay it forward as much as we can. But the thank you notes my partner Chris and I get actually bring tears to our eyes sometimes. Being part of somebody's wedding on their special day is a big honor for me. And I love doing all that stuff.
Amazing. You're a legend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
We'll
you. Just
see you
call me
next
Bruce,
time.
but I like it.
We'll be back again soon. But in the meantime, please rate, review, and subscribe. Tell your friends about On the Corner of Main Street. And of course, follow us on social. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @PlazaPod, And on Facebook, find us at Plaza Podcast. Or go right to the top and tweet Jonathan at Jonathan Jostle. We'll see you next time from right here on the corner of Main Street.